4 Sundays left before Christmas. It's scary. Advent starts today, traditionally, unless you're Celtic Advent, which started about a week ago. Although, if we live in Adelaide, we know when Christmas really starts, don't we? With the Christmas pageant, right? I love the Christmas pageant. I remember as a kid having this journey. My whole life has been a journey. I mark my life in sections, not by what God's been doing, but where I was at the Christmas pageant at the time. Maybe it's not quite that serious, but I remember as a kid going to the Christmas pageant. Like, you'd go and you'd line up early, and there was all the stuff going on and the blue honour line that you weren't allowed to cross. And you sat as close to that line as you could get without just daring to step over. And then when I was a little bit older, when I was a teenager, I volunteered for St. John. And that was cool because you get to put on a uniform and you get to stand on the other side of the blue honour line. It's really special. You get to almost be in the pageant, it's pretty cool. And then, when I was a bit older, when I finished high school, I worked for John Martin's. Yeah, you know what that means, right? I get to be in the Christmas pageant. And I got to do the most important role in the Christmas pageant, clown. Stop. Every time I tell that story, someone laughs, usually my wife or my kids. But I did. And being in the Christmas... Has anyone here worked for John Martin's and been in the Christmas pageant? No one. Well, I need to tell you what happens. Behind the scenes, it's amazing. You spend months getting ready for this thing, right? We talk about Advent being this 4 weeks of getting ready for Christmas. John Martin's is getting ready, apart from having to have all this Christmas stock on the floor in October, so it's all ready for pageant day so we can sell everything. Not that that's what the pageant's about, but there's all this stuff you have to do. You have to actually apply to be in the pageant. You don't just get automatically put in. You have to apply and you have to audition. And then you have to practice. And you have to go, and we used to go to the top deck of the Rundle Mall car park and practice walking. If you were pulling a float, I guess that, but clowns were very special. They had all sorts of roles they had to do with filling in between the floats and making it look like the floats weren't too close together or too far apart. And if a float broke down, you had to push it off to the side. We had all this training we had to do to be a clown in the Christmas pageant. And then you'd get up early and you'd be in the city on pageant morning way before the sun was up. And you had to get there early because you had to have all your makeup done and get your costume and all those things, but you also had to get the best accessories. If you were there early, you could get a scooter to ride, or you could get one of those buckets that when you throw it, all the tinsel comes out like water and then it comes back in again. All those things you could do. If you got there late, you got a little stick to wave or something. And so you wanted to get there early to get the best props to have as well. And then once you'd done all that, we'd all go off and have breakfast together at one of the local pubs that open up early, or they even set up a marquee in the South Parklands, and we'd go and have chicken and champagne breakfast at some unearthly hour. And then you'd have to gather around your floats and get ready, and people would come. There were all these people that would come to the pageant, and they would gather around the floats, and they would walk up and down. All the kids would climb all the floats and have photos taken. But then just before the pageant started, all the kids had gone. It was just all the people who were in the pageant, and we're waiting for that whistle to be blown, and everything just sort of goes quiet. And there's this moment of just waiting. It's like everyone holds their breath. It's a bit like Advent. We're in this moment of waiting, of holding our breath before something's about to happen. There's a theologian called Frederick Buechner, and he says this. We'll whack it up on the screen, but I'll read it to you. In the silence of midwinter dusk, okay, so he's Northern Hemisphere, but get the point. In the silence of a midwinter dusk, there is a sound so faint that for all you can tell, it may only be the sound of the silence itself. You hold your breath to listen. You are aware of the beating of your heart. The extraordinary thing that is about to happen is matched only by the extraordinary moment just before it happens. Advent is the name of that moment. The extraordinary moment before anything happens. But I've got to say, waiting is not normally how I approach Advent. Normally, it's hustle and bustle and lists and demands and busyness. And Vicky starts Christmas shopping in about July 2021 for Christmas 2024. Like, she's well ahead of the game. If we get to October and the Christmas shopping in our house is not done, then, it's just busy, isn't it? It's just busy. And I find that as I rush into the Advent season, I often quickly pass by these extraordinary moments, these extraordinary actions of God. There's so much about the Christmas story that's extraordinary. The angels, the wise men, the shepherds, the strange star things that happen, the strange signs in the sky. It's just an extraordinary story. And if we stop and just let it wash over us for a minute, it should surprise us. But we've become so used to it. I think one of the things that when I stop and think about Advent and when I think about the Christmas story, one of the things that I find most extraordinary is prophesied hundreds of years beforehand in Isaiah. It says this: "In that day, the wolf and the lamb will live together. The leopard will lie down with the baby goat. The calf and the yearling will be safe with the lion, and a little child will lead them all." I mean, just think about that for a minute. A little child. Like, what sort of crazy idea is this of God? I'm going to fix all the brokenness of the world. I'm going to repair everything. And I'm going to do it through a baby. I think it's Max Lucado that writes some of this stuff and talks about what a crazy idea it is. Now, this is God's great plan. I've got it. I've worked it all out now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send Jesus as a baby. It really makes no sense to how we understand the world. We don't understand that dynamic of power. In our society, children have no power. Even the child born into the most privilege isn't expected to change the world. Even the whole pageantry of what a king would be like. Vicky and I were in the UK a few years ago, and we were happened to be in London the day that Parliament was opening. And we didn't even know it was happening, but we wandered down. We were going to walk down to Buckingham Palace, and suddenly there's like all these fences up, and there are those guards, the ones with the red coats and the big hats, all standing every maybe 30, 40 metres along from Buckingham Palace all the way down the Mall and around to the Houses of Parliament. There were every 30 metres one of these guys on both sides of the road. And in between them, there are real soldiers with real automatic weapons walking around. And then all of a sudden, the gates of the palace open and horses start to come out. And when I say horses, I mean hundreds of horses with all shiny gold and silver. And they just march, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and the sun is just sparkling off them. And there's horses, and then there's more horses, and then there's more horses. And then there's a carriage that comes past just carrying the crown. And then more horses, and another carriage with the mace, the scepter thing for Parliament, and then more horses and more, and it just kept going. And eventually the Queen came past, and Prince Philip and Charles and Camilla, all in these carriages going past. And there were people everywhere cheering and clapping and waving flags and doing all this stuff. And we couldn't really get too close to the front, and off they went. And someone said to us, if you hang around, in about an hour, they all come back again. He said, but no one's here then. And it's true, we got to stand right at the front. There was no one there, and we got to watch them all come back again, almost in reverse order, And our daughter happened to turn around and take a selfie like this, just as the Queen was going past. And when we got home and looked at the photo, the Queen was actually looking at the camera. So she calls it her selfie with the Queen. But there's this pageantry that goes on when a child of royalty is born. And we see none of that in the Christmas story. We don't expect children to do much. Children don't have any power. Children are just childish. In fact, even governments, right? Every time a new government comes in, they tell us it's okay, now the adults are in charge, right? The kids have been running the country for a while, now the adults are in charge. You think, yeah, right. But this is God's preferred posture. This is how God reaches out to us. Small and simple and humble. Doesn't quite match with how we see power. God chooses to work from the ground up, not the top down. It is extraordinary that a child will be the one. That a child could be the leader. For me, it raises this question. If God's posture towards us is humble and childlike, then what should our posture towards God be? How do we reciprocate? What's our response? And we know if we open our Bible, Scripture is full of references. I don't have to give you all these references. You know them. Jesus said, anyone who wants to enter the kingdom has to receive it as a child. Or in Philippians 2, our attitude should be like that of Christ Jesus, who gave up all this stuff and became humble and born as a child and died a death on a cross. So maybe our response to God, our posture towards Him is somehow one of mutual submission, of mutual humility. As God comes humbly to us, so we come humbly to Him. Now, there are times to be bold before God. There are times to cry out to God boldly for justice, for intervention, for God's presence in the midst of our trials or in the midst of our family. When something is happening that we don't like, it's okay. The Psalms are full of it, calling out to God, crying out, God, why aren't you doing what you said you would do? So it's okay to be bold. But I've really come to believe that the real boldness in prayer can only come when we've learnt to posture ourselves and be humble before God. It's where the power comes from. Maybe Dietrich Bonhoeffer says it best. You know Bonhoeffer, right? He says this about Advent. The celebration of Advent is possible only to those who are troubled in soul, who know themselves to be poor and imperfect, and who look forward to something greater to come. The celebration of Advent is possible only to those who are troubled in soul, who know themselves to be poor and imperfect, and who look forward to something greater to come. And Bonhoeffer would know, right? You know Bonhoeffer's story. Living in Nazi Germany, he saw the best and the worst of humanity. Lots of the worst. And how people abuse power. How they abuse power in ways that are almost difficult and hard for us to understand. The only place I've ever been able to see that, not firsthand, but seen the effects of that, is actually when I was in Cambodia and went to some of the memorials and museums and tributes to what happened in the killing fields in the Khmer Rouge. Not that long ago, in my lifetime. Even today, like that humility and that poverty is difficult for us to understand. Because in this country, we're not really physically poor. Not financially poor, generally. We're definitely spiritually poor. Definitely relationally poor. We're definitely psychologically poor. And somehow we need to acknowledge that far more often than we do, that maybe we're poor too. And maybe we need to humbly posture ourselves before God. And I think that once we have that posture before God, once we've correctly postured ourselves before God, then we're very well placed to adopt God's posture towards the world. What would happen if we adopted God's posture of humility as we engage the world around us? Let's be honest, the church hasn't had a good reputation in the community for a while now. And often that the criticism that we hear is around, in one way or another, an abuse of power. You had this trust and you broke it. You abused the trust people put in you. You abused the financial trust. You had all this wealth and you've done nothing with it. You've had all these vulnerable people in your care and you damaged them more. And some of that criticism we have to wear because it's true. We ourselves haven't done well with power. Jesus brought a whole different way of engaging with the world. In Matthew 20, in the Message, I love the Message because it sort of gets really earthy. Jesus said, "You've observed how godless rulers throw their weight around, how quickly a little power goes to their heads. It's not going to be that way with you. Whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. That is what the Son of Man has done. He's come to serve, not to be served, and then to give away his life in exchange for the many who are held hostage." What if that's what we were known for? What if that's what we were known for? Humility, becoming small, giving away what we have, giving away even our very own lives, knowing that as we do that, others would be free from bondage. What reputation would that be like for us to have, church? Sorry, it feels a little chilly in here. Could just be the air conditioning. This is the work that we do together. This is what you're already involved in with your partnership with Baptist World Aid. This is what your generosity does. This is what it looks like to allow the weak and the vulnerable to actually speak to us and become leaders. We change lives from the ground up. We don't wait for governments to change things. We don't wait for the systems to be fixed. We work from the grassroots level and we work up. And often in the work that we do, it's led by children. I want to finish by telling you a story. It's a story of a woman I met in Cambodia last year. It was an interesting time to be in Cambodia. The world was just shutting down. We got back just in time. I think you guys were in Vietnam at the same time, Mike, and it was just this crazy time. We were in Phnom Penh airport, and there's this tiny little Cambodian guy with a suitcase almost as big as him, and he's loosely wearing a mask, carrying his suitcase, and he stops in the middle of the airport and he pulls his mask down and then just coughs everywhere. Like for about 20 or 30 seconds, and violent hacking cough. And then puts his mask back on, grabs his suitcase and keeps walking. And it's like, we're all just standing around saying, did we actually see that? But we met this lady in rural Cambodia, in a village right up by the Thai border, right in the heart of the final place that the Khmer Rouge had their final stand. And so there were landmines around everywhere. All the roads we got in had signs up, please don't walk in these fields, there's landmines here. We saw in the villages people who were... had legs missing, arms missing, were disabled from encounters with landmines. Her husband is a low-paid worker, a truck driver, and he would travel to try and find work in other places around Cambodia, even into Thailand, and would earn a little bit of money. But her community became part of our project, and our projects are child-centred community development, led by children. And so she entered the program because her 3 children were sponsored by Australian sponsors. And she joined this program with FH. So the video I showed you before, Irene, who was speaking in that video, was one of the leaders of that program, and that village was this village. Joined the program. And she learnt how to farm better. She learnt that she shouldn't use her garden as a family toilet because that can create health issues. She had a house like the one that was actually in that video, like the wooden house up on stilts, just a few metres square. And they lived there, they were sick all the time. The kids didn't go to school that often because they were unwell. Her children joined the program, and she got to join some community education things, and especially got to join a community savings bank. We do that. It's one of the greatest things we do. We seed fund it with about $300. And they bring the community together, and they can put their savings together, because accessing banking in some of these countries is very difficult. It's corrupt, interest rates are excessive, and you don't really get anywhere. So she joined the program, and she bought some pigs. She borrowed some money and she bought some pigs. And she bred those pigs, and she bred those pigs, and she bred those pigs, and she discovered that pigs breed like rabbits. And she had a whole heap of pigs. And she sold those pigs, and with the sale of those pigs, she bought 2 cows. And she bred those cows, and she bred those cows, and she bred those cows, and she discovered that cows breed like pigs who breed like rabbits. And by the time we got there, she had 10 cows. This is the end of a 9-year program that we were doing in her community. She had 10 cows. She used to have 15. But she just recently, a few months before, sold 5 of those cows for $700 each. And with the sale, with the $3,500 she got, she was building her new home. They're her kids. I can't show you their faces because they're dentists. No, because of some child protection things, I can't show you those faces. But this is her house. And her kids are healthy. And they go to school. And she's got this crop now that she farms. And she works as a volunteer health educator in her village. And that whole community is lifted out of poverty. And we don't work there anymore. We've moved on. We're doing it somewhere else because they are standing on their own 2 feet. That's what child sponsorship does. That's what working with children does. That's what starting at grassroots and building up. We don't have to keep sending money. We don't have to build hospitals or build schools or any of those things. We help people take that step that they need to and become self-sufficient and self-reliant. This is the work of the kingdom. This is the work that we're involved in. This is a call that we have. If I can just, to wrap it up, take you back to my experience with the Christmas pageant. I've just put the QR code up there just in case you want to check it again. You know, there are different ways we can approach kingdom ministry. And our journey in kingdom ministry can be just the same as my journey with the Christmas pageant. We can watch from the sidelines. Never quite cross that blue line. We can enjoy it, we can take it all in, but we can consume it. Or maybe we could sort of get involved, step over the line a bit, just sort of be involved but not really involved. Put on a bit of a costume and walk around. But the real joy comes when we fully participate. The real joy comes when we step into the place that God has called us to be. Where we no longer watch, but we join in. What's God calling you to do this Christmas? I'd love it if you supported Baptist World Aid, but I know that there are people who probably live right next door to you who the greatest gift you could give them this Christmas is just a cup of coffee, time with them, to listen to them. What's God asking you to do this Christmas as the world holds its breath, as we wait again for the coming of our King? Will you participate? Will you jump in? Will you celebrate in all the fullness that God calls us to? Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you that you are a King who came so humbly, that you gave up all the riches and you gave up all the splendor and the grandeur, and you were born in a cattle shed. And you did it not because it was the easiest way to enter the world or because you just wanted to sneak in. You did it because you were demonstrating something to us about what this kingdom is like. That this kingdom is a humble kingdom. That this kingdom expresses power in a totally different way. That this kingdom transforms lives from the ground up, not the top down. And Jesus, today you invite us into that same space. Would you give us the courage to follow you? Would you give us ears to hear what your Spirit is saying to the church? And this Christmas, would we overflow with joy and generosity to the world around us? We ask it in your name. Amen.